Well, thank you very much for your invitation to be here. We've been getting around quite a lot lately. I think on Thursday, I was in Fort Wayne for the 10-Point Coalition first anniversary celebration in Fort Wayne. For those of you who don't know, the 10-Point Coalition is an anti-violence program that began in Indianapolis quite some time ago under the leadership of Reverend Charles Harrison. We have gotten involved in that because we think it's an effective model to not necessarily push government into something, but to create a community-inspired program to stop violence, particularly youth gun violence from the ages of 12 to 24. It's been very successful in parts of Indianapolis that have adopted it, so we modeled it and moved it to Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne has just celebrated 1 year, and it's a tremendous opportunity. I was there the other day on Thursday, and the police chief announced these stats where there were crime reductions across the board, keeping in mind that this is geared towards effectively eliminating violence, gun violence with youth, but it has sort of a springboard. And the bottom line is these communities where this program is operating are being rejuvenated. So that's where we were on Thursday. On, Friday. We were in Fort Wayne on Friday. Then on Saturday, I went down to Evansville and met with a group of Second Amendment patriots. In fact, I think that's the name of the group down there, about 100 strong. Had a great event, chatted a little bit about some of these things, and then went on to Steuben County on Sunday. So if you know your Indiana map, that's Fort Wayne, Evansville, Steuben County, Indianapolis. So it's been quite a run. But it's great to be here today. I will chat a little bit about some of the things that are going on and maybe open it up for questions. There may be some things that you want to talk about or maybe ask some particular questions. Certainly, we're comforted by knowing that the state of Indiana, if there's one thing that I think our General Assembly does get right, is they do move in the right direction, generally speaking, when it comes to the area of supporting life in terms of legislative effort. There are different ways to pursue the pursuit of life, and we've seen some states really gold for gold with the heartbeat bills and some of the complete elimination of abortion bills. And we may look at those and say, boy, we ought to be doing that. But you really have to understand the legal apparatus to recognize that what we're really doing in Indiana is in a very effective strategy. It's an incremental process, because keep in mind, it is the law that abortions are legal in the United States of America, like it or not. But it's also the law that the states have the authority to regulate abortion within their states for the benefit of the health of women. So that regulatory process has been a very effective strategy to, I think, incrementally get to a point where perhaps we no longer have to have a need by some people of having abortion services. So we've seen that in Indiana. Indiana has enacted several pieces of legislation over the last several few years. And what happens is this common sense legislation gets adopted by the legislature, signed into law by the governor, and no sooner is the ink dry on the pen, but a group will file a request for injunctive relief and stop the bill before it even goes into effect. One of the bills that is in that little nowhere land right now is the parental consent bill. I happen to think that's a no-brainer, that you have minor children. We don't send our minor children to the dentist without knowing about it. We don't send them to the eye doctor without knowing about it. We don't send them out to get a tattoo without knowing about it. But yet there are some who feel that it's appropriate for minor children to seek and achieve an abortion without mom and dad knowing about it. I think that's wrong. Your General Assembly thinks that's wrong and enacted legislation to prevent that. And again, boom, right away we have an injunction in place, and that's something that we're still fighting about. This is how unfortunate it can be. I like to tell people that I remember a few years ago when some very good people and very well-intended people talked about waving the white flag on social issues, including this issue, and suggesting that we should move on to other areas, maybe areas that we were better suited toward. And I think that was a mistake. I think it was a mistake because what's happened in the area of life issues, whether it's in New York, where it's firmly in the law, or other states that are trying to adopt laws that allow for children to be killed in the 9th month of pregnancy, that couldn't have happened without our acquiescence, without our staying out of the game. And so I think it's important that we recognize that this is that the battle for life is it's a long-termer, it's a necessary battle, and we need to double down on our efforts. One of the legislative victories and legal victories was this past May when the United States Supreme Court approved Indiana's statute that was adopted in 2016 that said that medical clinics were required to bury or cremate the fetal remains from an abortion. Again, that was adopted in 2016. It went up through the appellate process. It went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said yes. Why is that so important? It's so important because it establishes dignity and respect in death for these aborted babies. What's the next step that follows? If we can establish dignity and respect for their death, then doesn't it follow that we can establish dignity and respect for their life, that they exist? Because one of the battles here, what the other side of this issue tries to do in order to not feel that this is anything inhumane, they pretend that these are not human beings. They're not human. They're a clump of cells. Or they're not human. It's medical waste. And as long as you can talk about something as medical waste, you don't have to feel that you've done anything morally wrong. This particular statute helps with that because we're establishing the humanity through the burial cremation process. We're establishing the humanity of children, and therefore that should equate within their life. So it was a very important decision. Can't say enough about how strong a decision that was. And then we move forward from May to September, and we understand how important it was in fact. Because, as we all know, September 3rd, Dr. Cloffer passed away. And everyone here, I'm sure, is aware of Dr. Cloffer and his reputation and history as Indiana's most prolific abortionist. Lost his license probably way too late in the sense of some of the things that he was doing and what we're even learning more about. But in death, he has proven to be just as problematic. Because on September 12, we all learned together through media accounts that 2,246 remains were located in a residential property in the state of Illinois. And upon hearing about it and learning that it was Dr. Cloffer's residence, certainly I was alerted, and those of us who were involved in this process were suspicious that these were Indiana children, but we didn't know for sure. The Illinois folks, I can't speak enough about the Illinois law enforcement and coroner's office and their state's attorney's office. They were entirely cooperative. They conducted a thorough investigation, cataloging information, documenting information, and were very cooperative with us. We contacted them and said, hey, we think these are our babies, and we would like to be involved. Well, it may not come to a surprise. They were pretty anxious to move them out of Illinois because it's a problem. And so they weren't putting up much of a struggle when we said we would like to come and take those off your hands if we can determine that they're from Indiana. So we sent people up to the state of Illinois, did an examination of the information that they had already provided, and confirmed that these babies were from the state of Indiana. If you don't know, Dr. Cloffer operated a clinic in Gary, a clinic in South Bend, and a clinic in Fort Wayne. So we then began a process that was unprecedented, a process of what do we do from here when we find out that there are aborted babies that have been transported almost 20 years. Well, let me strike that. These were abortions that occurred almost 20 years ago. At this moment, I can't say they were transported almost 20 years ago. I may never know when they were transported. So these were abortions that took place in 2000, 2001, 2002. We now know in 2019 that they had at some point in time been transported to the state of Illinois. As I stand here now, I don't know when. We may not ever know when, but we know it's happened. So we started a process of trying to understand what we needed to do in the investigation. Step number one was to identify these babies as Indiana babies. We did that. Step number two was to come up with a process to transport them back to the state of Indiana for further process. We did that. We organized, got the information from Will County, and transported the babies back. They're in South Bend, Indiana, now in the care of the coroner's office, not under the jurisdiction of the coroner. The coroner is doing a favor to my office, and they are under our supervision, but through the coroner and his role in maintaining entities in this state. Now, the reason they're in St. Joe County, because some people say, does that mean all of the babies came from St. Joe County? Not at all. It's a matter of the St. Joe County coroner was the first one who was able to assist us, had the resources and the wherewithal and the interest to provide us with a little help. So that's the only reason they're in St. Joe County. It has nothing to do with who we located, what we located, nothing at all. Once we got the babies here, we began the process then within our office to recognize what do we do from here, what's our plan moving forward. We put out a hotline with a phone number and an email so that anyone who had a connection or a potential connection with the fetuses would be able to contact us and express what their interest was. Now, one of the things that we're not doing, we're not trying to contact people who had abortions in 2000, 2001, 2002. Why is that? That's because many of these people don't want to be contacted. This was a private matter. They have their confidentiality. The last thing that we want to do is to do anything that disrupts that privacy and confidentiality. So we don't make that push there. We put the number out, we put the email out so that people who want to be contacted or want to ask for information, we can connect with those folks. Now, at this point, that information is one way. It's them coming in saying, here I am, can you tell me about this? Here's my concern, and we're jotting it down. We're not putting a bunch of information out at this point because we're still developing what that information is going to be. We don't want to misinform anyone. Some people might be concerned and say, well, I had an abortion in 2002, and I believe Dr. Kloffer was the person, and I'd like to get my baby back. It's not very practical, ladies and gentlemen. That's not very practical. And so we're going to have we may have some difficult conversations to have with people because we wouldn't do that in the sense of let's say, a full-grown adult who had been dead for 18 years and was located somewhere. We don't just turn that over to someone, a loved one. It doesn't work that way. Also, the condition of these remains is not such that I think, and maybe it shouldn't be my place to say, but I'll just express an opinion. Ultimately, a court can address this, but I don't think that anybody benefits from the observations that some of the people who conducted this investigation have had to experience. In that sense, in terms of assisting with closure or whatever reason. It's not necessarily my place to make that determination, but that's my opinion. My objective, I believe, would be to, if all goes well, to keep these remains together in some form or fashion and provide a meaningful resolution, send-off, if you will, and a mechanism in which those who want to be a part of an ongoing memorial know where to go and how to get that done. That's what we're trying to work toward. In the midst of putting this program together, we find out, as I'm sure most of you know, that an additional 165 remains were located in the state of Illinois, this time in Cook County, Illinois, in the trunk of a car. The story gets bleaker and bleaker. The trunk of a car. So again, we connect with Illinois. They're absolutely fabulous. In fact, the Cook County people were really smart. They called the Will County people because they already knew how to do all this. And the Will County people went up to Cook County and took over and went through their process and really did a super job of cataloging and documenting. Our office went along up to Will County where they were transported, and I believe we now have the additional 165 aborted babies have now been brought back to Indiana, and we are coordinating the connection to the remaining to the other number, and so the number now is 2,411. Will there be more numbers? Well, we hope not. Our methodology for trying to ascertain that question was to identify locations where we knew Dr. Kloffer to have clinics or storage facilities or homes or other property. That's limited by whatever entities he created that had his name or a name that we're aware of. If we're not aware of a particular entity that he's involved in, it could be possible that there would be something else. But I know that we have done an exhaustive search here in the state of Indiana. We've worked with the state of Illinois to hopefully encourage them to do the same thing. So we're hopeful that we're about done here, but we really never will know. In terms of where we go from the investigation, clearly one of our objectives is to make sure that these babies receive an appropriate final resolution. After that, we want to figure out what happened, and is this possible to happen again? Now, this is something where you always have to consider the law, because having been a lawman all my life, I'm very aware that the law is only as good as the next guy who's willing to follow it. So we talk about we ought to have a law, we ought to have a law, we ought to have a law. The law doesn't necessarily stop somebody from doing something like this. The law suggests now that these babies would have to be buried or cremated, but without some mechanism to verify that, how do we know the clinics are doing it? That's one of the questions that I put to members of the state legislature is, okay, you got this law, but maybe we need to have some sort of regulatory process that requires the clinics to confirm or check off that it's been done. Yes. So we're talking to some people about that as a priority moving forward so that we can try to be assured that the law helps. And this is something that you have to think through whenever you're talking about legislation, because oftentimes we feel good about legislation. Think, well, we got that law passed. Okay, that's good. It never quite works that way. I mean, ultimately, what I believe that we're striving for in the area of pro-life legislation, and I'm supportive of pro-life legislation, notwithstanding that you should understand, as Attorney General, my job is to defend the law regardless of what the law is. So my job is to defend the right that people have to an abortion under certain circumstances within the legal framework, and I will do that, notwithstanding my personal feeling, because that's my job. Having said that, I also recognize that our objective, in my view, should be to get to a point where we've created a compassionate culture of life, so that when that choice is on the horizon, and it will be, it would be naive to think that no matter what the law is, we're not going to have someone say, well, I'm pregnant, I'm single, I'm poor, I don't have options, I got to make a choice. We can all say it's no choice, but there are people who are going to make that choice. Our goal as a society, in my view, is to help them make the right choice. And we help them make the right choice by making sure that there are options for that single, unmarried, poor, no resources person through the pregnancy, including the pregnancy, and just as importantly, if not more importantly, in raising that child. Because most of what ails us in this nation is a result of what comes out of the home, and much of